Welcome to Trump, America, and Rupturing the World Order with Jeffrey Sachs. This is Science for Peace event. My name is John Duncan, and I'm on the board of Science for Peace and a faculty member at the University of Toronto. Science for Peace is a charitable organization dedicated to popular education and research, the intersections of demilitarization, decarbonization, and social justice. We work in the physical, social, and human sciences, taking a knowledge-based approach to these issues. Please visit our website at Science for Peace, all one word, scienceforpeace.org. We also have a YouTube channel where this webinar will be uploaded along with our other cool videos. Time with our speaker today is limited, so we're minimizing introductions. Our goal is to begin with a talk of about 30 minutes and leave about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So as many of you know, Professor Sachs is a leading critical voice in the world today. He has dedicated his career to sustainable and economic development. He completed his PhD in economics at Harvard and has taught at both Harvard and Columbia, where he directed the Earth Institute. He has advised major world players on these issues and has long been a high-level advisor at the UN. He's a recipient of many awards and has authored or co-authored some 15, 16 books and many, many articles. Please look up his excellent work. If you'll allow me, I'll pass on one observation by way of brief introduction. Mark Twain once wrote this about America. Quote, "It is by the goodness of God that in our country we have three unspeakably precious gifts. One, freedom of speech. Two, freedom of conscience. And three, the prudence never to practice either of them." Unquote. In the most well-intentioned way possible, I want to suggest to you that Professor Sachs may have only the first two of these gifts. It sometimes seems that he is uninterested in the prudence to not exercise his freedom of conscience and speech. And we are ever so grateful for this imprudence. For in a time of increasing obfuscation, deception, and danger, Professor Sachs has the courage to exercise the freedom of speech and to tell it like it is. It is a great honor to introduce Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs discussing Trump, America, and rupturing the world order. Please go ahead, Professor Sachs.
John, thank you so much. Any introduction that includes Mark Twain is wonderful. So I am so happy you've made my day. And it's great to be with all of you. What can I say? First, I'm very proud of your Prime Minister. He was a student in my department 40 years ago, and he is the world leader speaking absolutely truthfully and clearly. And it's just wonderful. And we're very, very proud of him and what he's has said, both in his trip to Beijing and his trip to Davos is extremely important. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, so I always looked south to Canada. Uh, Windsor, Ontario was due south across the bridge. And I always regarded my southern neighbor, Canada, as the sane part of North America. And this is absolutely true today. We've gone completely insane in our part of North America. Um, and thank God for Canada holding things together. I was in Mexico a couple of days ago meeting with the government officials there, and they're sane also, but really under the gun, literally, um, but also fully aware of how strange and challenging the times are. What can I say? We have uh, maybe three issues interacting that are not easy to uh, pry apart fully. Uh, First, we have the long-term U.S. Aspirations to run the world. And that is a long-standing issue that continues until today. Second, we have the reality of deep global change, especially the rise of China, which is a fundamentally important historical event, and in my view, a very good one, because China is a great civilization, and I'm uh, think it benefits the whole world when China is doing well. China is not a threat. China is a great asset to the world, in my view. And third, we have Donald Trump, who is, as an individual, uh, psychologically disturbed and absolutely in the wrong job, without question. Uh, the job of real estate development was already too much. The job of deciding on war and peace is something that makes us shake in our shoes because he's utterly incompetent and psychologically imbalanced. It's not only that he's a nasty man. He is a dark triad personality. And this is real. And we've seen it for his whole life, and it remains true today, but with a lot of further decompensation, in my view, with age and with uh, a lifelong megalomania playing right now. So these are three interacting variables which make the world scene very complicated. In our lives, we've seen three phases of geopolitics. Uh, the US was the predominant power by far after World War II and determined a great deal of the shape of global change, some of it for the very good, much of it absolutely uh, horrendous, because U.S. foreign policy, given all that power, was basically uh, formed on the basis of regime change. If you don't like your counterpart, you don't need to negotiate with them, you just need to overthrow them. And this has been American foreign policy for the period after World War II, and especially after the formation of the CIA. And this is dozens and dozens and dozens of cases, almost all of which end badly. Um, but after World War II, uh, the U.S. Basically took the baton from the British Empire and said, "Now it's us," and but confronted a nuclear counterpart, the Soviet Union, and we had a U.S. predominance over much of the world, uh, U.S. Uh, machinations over places that wanted to be neutral. That was the worst thing you could be in the Cold War is neutral. That means you were an enemy of the United States. And we had a Soviet Union which had tens of thousands of nuclear warheads. So it was, and pretty sophisticated uh, uh, military technology. Um, and so that was the Cold War era. The second phase was the demise of the Soviet Union, which was a miracle the way that it happened. A man of peace came to power. The system was decrepit, but it wasn't in outright collapse. But Gorbachev was a great statesman, I think a wonderful human being. And rather than kill a lot of people, he allowed the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And we were absolutely blessed by that. I happened to be an advisor of his economic team in 1990-91 and of his successor, Boris Yeltsin, in 92-93, I had one uh, main responsibility, which was to try to raise emergency financial support from the Western world to ease what was a very deep economic crisis. But the US was not interested in any help or partnership with the Soviet Union or its successor state, Russia. What I got to see close up was when Gorbachev came and offered peace, the United States said, "Thank you very much. We win. We have won. Now we run the world, and you are uh, not only of no interest, we would rather bring you to your knees rather than to see you stable and prosperous anytime soon." So the second phase of geopolitics in our lifetime was the so-called unipolar moment, which was a delusional state of American thinking that with the end of the Soviet Union, the United States truly did run the world. And that period lasted roughly from uh, 1990 or so, or 1991, which was the end of the Soviet Union, to around 2010. It was never true that it was a unipolar moment. This was a conceit of the United States that there was a unipolar moment. When you're 4% of the world population, you can't really run the other 96%, period. Um, but you can think that you can. And there's no doubt that under Clinton and George Bush Jr., they thought they could run the world. Around 2010, the delusion faded when somebody opened their eyes and saw China. I can tell you from my own career, nobody in Washington paid attention to China other than as a kind of play against Russia, but not as a power in its own right until around 2010. The unipolar moment never, in my understanding, reflected on the fact that, well, in 1992, we're very powerful, but in 20 years from now, China will be 4 times the size and a lot more powerful. I never heard that once from any president or policymaker or secretary of state or chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors or anybody else in the United States. China was an afterthought, a place where you could make your components, but not something to, quote, worry about. Around 2010, they started to worry because China, by that point, had had 30 years of very rapid and very skilled development, really remarkable achievements. And in the official data, China was closing in on the United States in absolute economic size in international prices or purchasing power prices. And this started to scare the US. Then in 2013, 14, 15, China took a number of initiatives. One is called the Belt and Road Initiative to uh, look outward and to finance connectivity between China and the rest of the world. And even more consequential was a program called Made in China 2025, which was a brilliant piece of industrial policy where the Chinese State Council listed 10 high technology areas that China should excel in by the year 2025. And they built an industrial policy around this, and it was enormously successful. And by 2015, uh, the unipolar idea had been replaced by the rhetoric that the rise of China was a great threat to American dominance, that China was an evil force in the world, and that China's rise must be contained. So these are the three broad uh, periods that I would emphasize. China did nothing, in my opinion, to justify fear. except that it was successful in industrial production and in science policy and in technology innovation and in creating a system for very rapid economic catching up and then for moving from catching up to outright innovation. And so I applaud China's success. It's truly remarkable, but I don't believe for a moment that China is a threat to its neighbors or to the United States or to anybody else. And I don't think that China's rise in any way hinders our well-being or has hurt our economy. Uh, it definitely hurt some import competing sectors. That's how international trade works. That some lose and others win, and the winners are more than the losers, and the winners should compensate the losers. The big problem in American politics is that winners never compensate losers. If you are a loser, you're a loser in America, in the United States. This is a tough, nasty, corrupt political system, and the rich don't want to give up anything. And so if they win a lot from China and workers in the American Midwest lose from import competition, there's no sharing in America, believe me. Uh, what you get instead is a Donald Trump who says China's your enemy, and I'm going to take care of your enemy. So we entered in this most recent phase, uh, the great American competition with China, which to my mind is a economic nonsense, um, because basically China's not a threat. And of course, it's doing very well, so it should be a spur to us to do better, but not seen as some dire national security threat. So all of this, these changes, and I should add one more major development in our economies and inside the United States, which was a dramatic rise of income and wealth inequality in the last 40 years, which really is the result of technological change that favored professionals and disfavored blue collar workers whose jobs could be automated. We ended up with a very divided society. We ended up with the perception of great threat and insecurity stoked by politicians who wanted to point to outsiders as the big threat. And um, we ended up with Donald Trump. This is a very peculiar, particular phenomenon. It's on top of everything else. It's one of those bad accidents of history. Uh, and it's very dangerous, and we don't know exactly what the outcome uh, still will be of all of this. Maybe we'll just get lucky and he will end up just going away. He will not be successful in the sense of achieving uh, what his base thinks he's bringing them. He has no economic plan, no economic policy that can deliver for the working class. His taxes cuts were for the super rich, and his tariffs are paid by his voters. And so they're starting to figure out that this guy is not what he claimed, their savior. He's just a very confused old man, and his popularity is declining. Um, and so the instability as a result of all of this rises. What does this add up to in terms of American foreign policy? Well, part is just idiosyncratic confusion. Um, there's no doubt a high degree of confusion that is not based on deep forces. If Biden had been president and compos mentis, and he was not a good president, by the way, so I'm not partisan in this. He was an awful president as far as I'm concerned, and non-compos mentis for 2 years. Um, but in any event, he would not have kidnapped the president of Venezuela. That's not a deep state uh, or deep foreign policy. That is an idiosyncrasy of Donald Trump and Marco Rubio. It's not something that can be explained on a fundamental level. Even grabbing the oil is not really what's at stake there. The whole thing is bizarre, childish, dangerous, uh, really nuts, actually, without a strategic direction. Um, but there are some deeper forces at play that we should understand. And one of them is that Washington and the security state of Washington, which runs Washington, still believes in American hegemony, that it's worth fighting for. And so Trump has his uh, very profound idiosyncrasies, but the idea of American hegemony has not been abandoned at all. And the fight with China is taken very seriously, and America's still playing to win, if you want to put it that way. In a football metaphor, it's bizarre. This is not the way the world should be thought of, but America's still playing to win. And if I could try to discern what the American strategy it is roughly the following. First, America owns the Americas. That means from Canada down to Tierra del Fuego. So you are the 51st state in the deep state view. You can humor yourselves thinking you're a separate country, but don't take it too seriously. Of course, I'm joking, but this is basically the view that we will run the Americas, and no one's really going to have any other say, and we're not really going to allow China and Russia to trade in the Americas. It's really going to be an American show. So that's how we're going to keep hegemony in our own corner of the world. By the way, this is not in the remotest what the Monroe Doctrine was about. The Monroe Doctrine was not about the United States running the Western world. The Monroe Doctrine was the United States saying that Europe should not meddle with new colonies in the Western world, something completely different. But in any event, the strategy is the Americas are ours, and so is Greenland. So we just have to look at a map. And because of climate change, the Arctic is becoming more important. So Canada really is ours. Because how could you leave something as valuable as the Arctic to something that isn't the United States? So this is one part. Second is Europe. Europe will be our vassal, and it will be our vassal that actually will now pay for its own defense. We don't want to pay for their defense, but we certainly don't want them to be independent. So Europe, we still own. This is another part of the idea. There's no independence in Europe. They're going to pay for their own military defense, but they're not going to have any real sovereignty. Africa doesn't register except for cobalt. We'll get the cobalt one way or another. But other than that, there's no interest in Africa. The Middle East, we own. Okay, we don't own it, Israel owns it. But we will back Israel, and Israel will have hegemonic power in the Middle East. And the Arab world is basically ours anyway because our military bases are all over the Gulf. And if we can just take care of Iran in the next 48 hours, then the whole Middle East will be under U.S. Sovereignty. India will be ours because they're afraid of China, so we'll side with India in the so-called Quad, the United States, India, Japan, Australia. And what can India do? They're afraid of China, so they're on our side. And then Southeast Asia, it's half and half, but we have enough footholds in Singapore, in Vietnam, which is anti-China, in the Philippines, which we still own, they think, that we really have a lot of Southeast Asia. Of course, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand are ours. So what are we missing? We're missing Russia, but it's okay. We'll make some deals with Russia, and our big threat is China, but we basically have China cornered. And China doesn't really have friends, and we're going to make sure they don't have friends, and they won't operate in any of the places that I just mentioned. And so, in the end, we're still going to run the world. That, to my mind, is how, to put it in 3 minutes, how Washington views the world. It's nuts, of course. Not any part of the world would agree with that assessment, but that's the Washington view of the world. Europe thinks, well, we're Europeans, we're not the United States. Uh, but the US thinks differently. Latin America actually doesn't really accept that it's run by the United States, nor does Canada. Um, Africa will be a quarter of the world population in 2050. India actually is a big place that doesn't feel like it's a part of the U.S. system. It's the most populous country in the world with a civilization 10 times older than the United States, and it's not about to be played by the U.S. China is enormously successful and has a production capacity that is multiples of the United States and is the lead trade partner of 120 countries in the world. So there is a big disjunction between the American view of the world, US view of the world, which is in the end, we're still going to run the show, and the reality of the world. And that means that we have a lot of tension and confusion for years to come. I should add, by the way, academia is not very helpful in all of this because the whole East Coast is owned by the military industrial complex, I'm sorry to say. Uh, I've spent 45 years in two wonderful universities, but the funding, what's taught, how it's viewed, is completely Washington centric. So, of course, we have critical voices, but it's not really institutions. The Harvard Kennedy School is not a critical voice. SEPA at Columbia is not a critical voice. Our lead faculty is now Hillary Clinton, Mike Pompeo, Victoria Nuland, and Jack Lew. Uh, so it's unbelievable. Uh, so in this sense, we don't really have much sanity and intelligence in the debate right now. There's a lot of confusion. Uh, I regard Foreign Affairs magazine more as a psychiatric journal of American neuroticism than I do a foreign policy journal, because the main purpose of Foreign Affairs is to reassure Americans that they're still number one, despite all evidence to the contrary. So almost every issue, every article is, in the end, we're still going to beat China. In the end, we still have the chokeholds. In the end, we still can do whatever we want. Okay, so let me just uh, say a positive side about the world. Um, the American view is absolutely incoherent, and with Trump, it's not even a view. It's an emotional outpouring day by day, and so it's quite dangerous. And I can't really predict in the short term. From a if I look try to look ahead 20 years or 25 years, um, and assuming that we avoid the worst, um, then what I would say is that the multipolarity of the world will increase. Uh, China is an enormously successful society. India is economically and technologically rapidly on the rise. And I would, and Southeast Asia. Similarly, in very close trade and financial and technological relations with China is also becoming very much a middle income region of the world uh, with strong technology. I believe that Africa too uh, will play a positive and rising role, excuse me, sorry, will play a growing role in the world economy because there's a basic tendency uh, in the world for poorer countries to be able to grow faster than richer countries because they can leapfrog technologies and they can uh, put kids in school and do things that end the reasons for the impoverishment fairly reliably. So I believe we're moving to a more uh, equal multipolar world. And if we can get rid of our illusions and delusions about that and not become terrified by this and rather celebrate it, um, the world could actually be okay. We could even address climate change. We could decarbonize our energy systems. We could denuclearize. If we calm down and understood that we're not in some kind of existential struggle, that these are not enemies, these are just parts of the world catching up from a very strange historical juncture in which the so-called Western world ran so far ahead of the rest of the world for 150 years that it created this lopsided reality. If we could just take a deep breath and get a hold and welcome the rapid advances of other parts of the world could be not bad, actually. So I'm not profoundly pessimistic. We're not running out of Earth. Uh, when you hear that we're using 1.5 Earths and so forth, that is only true if we don't change technology. If we decide we're going to stick with fossil fuels and old technologies rather than moving to decarbonization. We don't lack, in other words, the technologies to make a sustainable, prosperous world for everybody. That's the very good news. There's no reason for conflict. Only uh, our own flawed emotional systems. And the main thing we should learn in life is not to have people like Donald Trump as president. This is absolutely the bottom line. You can't have a bigger failure than that in your politics. Well, let's hope we just get rid of him soon, and that he finishes, leaves, and the world will look a little bit better after that. So that's a quick overview, John, and back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for ending with a little bit of positivity because it was getting fairly negative there. But definitely it's appropriate because we have some very big challenges here. So we have about 10 minutes. So what can if you got I see there's already a couple of hands. So maybe I'll if you guys are quick, we get three questions to Jeffrey and then see if we can get to another one. Arn, you're first on the list. Go ahead. Can you
Uh, Yes, thank you very much for a very good but short presentation. To make it quick, your characterization of China as not really being a threat to anyone, I for the most part share. There is little evidence that they have any intention of invading any country around the world, and indeed, of course, haven't done so since their skirmish with Vietnam almost 40 years ago. However, when one talks about China, the thing that always comes up is authoritarianism and their own human rights record, and in particular, the policies with regard to Xinjiang and Tibet. And I wonder whether you could address those concerns with regard to China.
Good. Very good.
Paul, you're next. Can you keep it brief? I think you're muted still.
There, how's that now?
Good.
Thank you. Jeffrey, thanks. I'm teaching some of your stuff tomorrow, actually, in my global health class. So I
Great.
appreciate it. My quick question is, though, I'm trying to understand, there's a paucity of brain cells in Donald Trump's head. And really within US politics, what one thinks of, though, is configurations or, aggregations of various forces that dominate different time at different times. And right now, there's a domination of a particular strand of, hyper aggressive, internal looking things. So I'm not worried about Donald Trump other than he represents the ability to promote some of the very, very aggressive militaristic strands within that country, and that we don't see that, and we're aiming kind of at the wrong place unless we're thinking about how those forces have come together to dominate U.S. politics at the current time.
Great.
All right, George, you've got a question. Try to keep it brief, please.
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. With regard to your discussion about the multipolar world and your hope that that is something to come in the future, do you think that other countries like China and India have the same kind of view of the benefit, the potential benefit of a multipolar world, or are they still isolationist in a way? And that's
Great.
my question. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much for all three deep questions. And I apologize for being very brief about them. Uh, China is a very well-ordered society. Uh, and it feels, there is really a civilizational depth. People behave. Uh, there is a very low level of violence. I have dozens or hundreds of friends who live wonderful lives. They travel, they're tourists, they're professionals. Uh, the academic colleagues of mine, incidentally, at Peking University or Tsinghua University, have more input on public policy than academics do in the United States, because China takes very seriously its advisory groups and its consultative groups and its discussions and so on. The idea that this is a deeply repressive, totalitarian state is utterly false. It is a state, though, that is not organized around electoral competition. It's organized around promotion of demonstrated talent. It's an administrative state, like China has had for 2,000 years under the Confucian framework. And what impresses me is the talent of the counterparts that I see. And the basic organization of the Chinese system, both in the party and in the state apparatus, is that you start out at a local level, and if you do well, you get promoted to a larger place, and if you do well, you get promoted to a larger place, and if you do well, you get promoted to Beijing, and if you do well, et cetera, et cetera. One very impressive individual that I work with in one of the most senior positions in China is the party secretary of Shanghai. You could imagine how important that position is. What is his background? He was a star PhD engineer at Tsinghua University. Then he became dean of Tsinghua. Then he became president of Tsinghua University. Then he became minister of environment at the federal level. Then he became party secretary of Shanghai. At each step, he performed. Because he performed, he was promoted. And this is an enormously talented uh, group of people. I did a quick analysis, by the way. The US cabinet has no PhD in it, not one out of the 35 uh, people in the cabinet. The highest technical degree is one master's degree from MIT. The rest are lawyers or business people, but not a single high uh, degree. China has 11 PhDs in its cabinet, and in the Politburo, it's a similar count. So this is a very big difference, is just the level of competency. I say all of this because what is said also about Xinjiang in Tibet is not right. Um, there is no genocide underway in Xinjiang. There actually is, by the way, a genocide underway in Gaza with the full support of the United States government. In Gaza, 100,000 or more innocent people were killed before our eyes using our weapons, our financing, our facial identification systems, and the United States didn't breathe a word about that. In Xinjiang, the claim isn't even that anyone has been killed, not one. The claim is that there are detention camps and so forth. That's what's called a genocide. Almost all of this is propaganda, not all of it, because China cracked down on an independence movement. Um, and I've been to Xinjiang. There was there really was a kind of insurgency. I don't know everything that has happened, but I can tell you it is no genocide. If you want to know about a genocide, Israel, unfortunately, is committing a genocide. And we should pay attention to that because we're funding it, supporting it, and abetting it. When it comes to Tibet, this is also an absolutely fascinating issue. And I don't want to uh, oversimplify it, but both Tibet and Xinjiang were brought into the Qing Empire 300 years ago. And what happened was that at the end of the Qing dynasty and the Chinese, uh, um, the establishment of the Republic of China in 1912, uh, Tibet declared its independence, and the nationalist government of China rejected it, said, "You're part of China. You've been part of the empire uh, for 300 years." The British, being the British, uh, started signing treaties with Tibet in 1914. And that's, by the way, where a lot of the current problems come from. Um, and when the People's Republic of China was established as again, a unified, centralized state, it reasserted its control over Tibet. Uh, Tibet calls it, or it's called an invasion. China calls it a not even a restoration, saying Tibet has always been part of China since the last 300 years. It raises a lot of questions. I don't want to oversimplify anything, but it's not the kind of reality that causes us to think that this is a country out to take over the world or a threat to us. This is their history over the past 300 years. And incidentally, in Tibet, Xinjiang, and Mongolia, they don't even view their conquest as by China in the Qing dynasty. They view it as by, uh, um, um, oh my God, sorry. I'm sorry, by the Manchus, who were the Qing dynasty. So the Manchus, coming from the steppe region of northeast China, invaded China, controlled Peking, and invaded the other steppe regions. So when you go to Mongolia, for example, and ask, how do you feel about the period of Chinese occupation? They say, we weren't ever under China, we were under the Manchus. So it's very complicated. But I do want to say about Chinese foreign policy, China never once in 1,000 years invaded Japan. China never once in 1,000 years invaded Korea. China invaded Vietnam twice, once in 1410, 615 years ago, and for 1 month in 1979. China is not an overseas expansionist country and never has been in its 2,200 years of unity. So I want to underscore that I do not believe that China is any threat whatsoever to the world or even to its next door neighbors. So just to say all of that. George asked, well, what do China and India believe about a multipolar world? They really believe in it for the same reason, basically. India was under British rule, essentially from the arrival of the East India Company in the early 1600s, but really from 1757 to 1947. They don't like that. This was not a pleasant experience. They don't want to be recolonized. China, from 1839 to 1949, was facing what they call a century of humiliation. And what they mean by that is, first, the British showed up in the first Opium War. Britain went to war to demand that China be open to opium trade. Absolutely astounding. They did that twice, in 1839 and in 1856. Then came all of the European imperial powers and the United States demanding extraterritorial rights at the end of the 19th century in the so-called open door policy, which means we will run Shanghai and your coastline, not you. And then Japan basically brutally and repeatedly invaded China from 1894 to 1945. So China's main view in the world is, don't do this to us again. That's the main idea. Not that we want to run the world, but we don't want to be picked apart. We don't want to be invaded. China lost 15 to 20 million people in World War II. We don't even know about it, basically. But it was a horror story under the Japanese. And China's most important foreign policy is, don't meddle in our affairs. Don't try to pull us apart. Don't play games in Taiwan. Don't play games in Tibet. Stay out of our territory. We're not threatening you, but don't come close to threaten us, if I could summarize Chinese foreign policy. And so when you ask, do China and India want a multipolar world? Absolutely. They want peace. They don't want the United States breathing down their neck. They don't want new neocolonialism or dominance or American choke points or the CIA playing games in Tibet or in Xinjiang or elsewhere to try to create unrest. So this is, to my mind, the right answer. They've experienced the other and they don't want it. And then finally, what's at play in the United States in this foreign policy? Part, as I said, is idiosyncrasy, but of course there are deeper forces at work. The deepest force at work is that the United States became a military regime, basically in 1947, with the invention of the CIA. And it's not an accident that Dwight Eisenhower, in his farewell address, warned the American people about the military-industrial complex. That was not just a light goodbye. That was the lead general of the United States telling the American people, you are run by the military, and you're basically run by a security state. And this is true of American foreign policy. it's really shocking. But this is why the United States has tried on about 100 occasions, by my count, to overthrow other countries' governments in so-called regime change operations. When Kennedy was killed in 1963, I think by the CIA with very high likelihood, um, this was a reinforcement of that point. And it's stunning to think within a month of Kennedy's assassination, Truman wrote an op-ed that said the biggest mistake of my life was signing the CIA into existence. That was not an innocent observation. That was Truman saying, who killed your president? He didn't put it exactly that way, but the timing was completely unmistakable. And this, I think, is the deepest part at work. There's nothing honest about our foreign policy. It is organized around power. And when you have someone as intemperate as Trump, it adds, of course, to the complexity. But Biden was not a peace-loving man. And Obama signed the CIA order to overthrow the Syrian government. Obama signed the order to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. Obama presided over the coup in the Maidan in February 22nd, 2014, that set the path to the Ukraine war. Now, the one who did that, Victoria Nuland, as I mentioned, is my colleague at Columbia University. So this is the deep state. It's real. It's extremely powerful. It's very nasty. Uh, and the public is not, actually, the American public is not militarized. They don't want a war in Iran. They don't want any of these wars. They just see the price tag all the time, and they say no. But American public opinion has no constraint on this. Now, there's a very specific point uh, which deserves more time, but the Israel lobby is very real, and it shows that you can have a security state that is also deeply influenced by a particular interest group. This is Christian Zionists, Jewish Zionists, whatever they are, because it's a mix. This is another peculiarity, and it's a reason for a lot of the wars over the last 30 years. If you look at the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, I don't know if people saw his interview with Tucker Carlson a couple of days ago. The man's a complete nitwit uh, and a simpleton, I'm afraid. But he read Genesis chapter 15, and that's the basis of his foreign policy. Um, or, I mean, his projection that if Israel wants to take the rest of the Middle East, well, it's God-given right. So and that's a very powerful part of Trump's base. Maybe 35% of his vote came from Christian evangelicals that might subscribe to Huckabee's uh, thinking. So there are a lot of specific peculiarities in the US, but the deepest problem is we have a military industrial state that runs foreign policy. Uh, it is not in any civilian control. It has the delusions of grandeur, and it has made a big mess in the world for decades.
Oh my goodness, we're back to the depressing
Yeah,
part.
sorry, I didn't mean to end there, but
But no, it's also very inspirational because, as I said, you really are adept at saying it like it is. A lot of people pull their punches a bit, And we thank you so much for lacking that third gift that Mark Twain mentioned, and having the courage to speak truth to power. And maybe one day you can come up and visit us in person in the 51st state. We'd love to
Yeah,
have you here.
I always love to come, and we'll do that.
All right, thank you so much.
Great to
Bye,
see everybody.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.